let me get going. The first thing I'm going to use is this, which is a 30mm flat brush. I use a lot of this. I'm also going to be using a decorating roller. These are seam rollers for wallpaper. My husband thinks we've got one of these in the garage, but we don't. I've got it. So I'm going to use that for putting some paint down. It just gives different marks and textures. Now, the paint I'm using Atelier Interactive acrylic. And I'm going to be using a bit of muck off the palette to start off with. Get myself comfy. So I'm going to start off, I'm making an approximate sky colour. But not a lot. I want some moodiness in there. So I've got some blue, ultramarine, I've got some white, and I've got some grey that I'm doing as well. So this is just really loosely covering the canvas. When I say canvas, I'm actually using canvas paper here, which is it's the SAA's acrylic paper, and I really like using this. So now I kind of want to approximate having some land in here. So I'm going to take some ultramarine, and I've got this colour, this light red, which is this one in the middle. It's a bit like a burnt sienna, and I'm mixing those two together with a bit of white. I want this sort of put another layer in behind it. This is more ultramarine. So you can see it's a landscape, but I don't want to, I'm not drawing outlines of anything. I'm not putting anything in particular in there. Now, one thing I want to do is put a bit more of this colour in. See what happens when I do that. Now, I love Zoom because it allows me to show you this in close-up. But what I don't like is I can't hear people's reactions when you do things. Putting this in, can you see the textures that that gives me? Okay, now let me carry on. I'm going to put some turquoise in. A couple of the reference pictures I've got, I will show them to you at the end because I don't want to be influenced by them too much. I'm not looking too closely at them. But I was very lucky to go to Canada a couple of years ago, and in fact just before lockdown, and some of the glacial water out there is amazing.
Is that just water you're spraying on?
Yes, it's just a spray bottle of water. I'm just trying to make it messy. I'm managing, I know. Just grabbing some kitchen towel. Now, one of the advantages of the Atelier Interactive is that it stays wet for a long time. But one of the disadvantages is that it stays wet for a long time. So when I'm doing something like this and I spray water everywhere, it does make a bit of a tricky to paint over it. All I'm using is, while the paint is still wet, I'm just dabbing it with my tissue. And I'm just trying to create marks and move some of the paint about. I don't want to make too many decisions yet. And I quite like the way it kind of lifts a bit of paint, it smudges things through. Yeah, I quite like some of those things. I think I might increase a bit of mounting, but at the moment I'm getting a bit too close to being half and half. So I need to take something up here. So, okay, what I've got here now is I've just got some white paint on a palette knife. Putting that up there. I'm going to make increase my mounting. This is 2 half and half for me, so I'm bringing my mountains up. And the thing with working like this with this semi-abstract is I'm composing it as I go along. I've thought about what I'm going to do, but I hadn't really composed it before I started. And it's kind of one of those things that, you know, you need to let things happen. It's quite liberating. It's quite scary when you first do it, this sort of way of working. Has anybody kind of worked like this before, where you just really let go? Anybody going to give me an answer on that one? No, nobody's done this before. You'll have some fun. I hope you have a go at doing this. Okay, now I need a bit more of my grey. I have this colour which I use quite frequently. It's called Toning Grey. I'll just pop some into my palette. And it's this colour here. So it's a sort of, it's almost the colour of the palette actually, this light grey colour. And it's quite a nice colour. I'm going to pick some up on my palette knife, but I'm mixing a little bit of ultramarine and umber into it. I want it to be a little bit darker. I'm going to do some with my brush as well now. So I've got these darker clouds coming up in the background. A few darker bits there. I've kind of ended up losing all of my sky colour, but I quite like that colour mixing into here. So hopefully you can start to see the sort of composition emerging. I'm now no longer half and half, which I'm happy about. So we will end up with a landscape, but it's just this sort of abstract way of starting. And I try every time to be more abstract, and every time I end up kind of coming back in and finishing it off and tidying it up. So I'm going to pick up some of this colour on my roller. It's turquoise and white. I just quite like the texture that gives across something different. Now, what are we, 10 minutes in, and we've kind of got the bones of our composition going on here. So I want to just put, so I've kind of got a layer in the sky. I've got a position for this, but I need to start building my layers onto that as well. So if we have, I'm going to use some yellow ochre, some white and some grey to give me this colour here. I'm kind of just almost printing with the brush here.
Denise, do you always just use that brush and the roller, or do you use smaller brushes?
No, I've got a whole selection of other brushes here that I will use.
Right.
You know, whole variety of different things all lurking in the corner. But what I find is if I use this brush to start off with, it stops me going into detail too soon.
Right. Yeah.
So if I start using a smaller brush, I'd be here and I'd be painting like this. Whereas using this brush, I tend to paint more from, you see me in the other picture, from my shoulder, because I'm using my whole arm. Just coming in with a stronger colour here. And I'm trying to not be too specific, because I will end up doing more to this later. And what I will do is I'll come back in and I'll use the patterns and shapes that I've got in here. I'm just squirting it with some water, because that can sometimes create interesting patterns. Might even put some snow on some of these later, but that's where we come down to sort of detail, and I don't need that yet. And I also want to lose some edges. So I'm dabbing around again with these colours. If I just show you, this is pretty much my entire colour palette. So I've got 2 or 3 blues, brown, grey and white in this one. And then I've got a green, a yellow ochre, this one that's called red gold, but it's a bit like burnt sienna, and a magenta. So that's all of the colours that I've got. I think that's all of the colours I will use. I'll let you know if I change that. There's one other colour that I quite often use, which is a green black. Again, this just creates marks, and I'll play with those later. I do like getting messy. Can you see, I don't know if you can see in this, that there's little spots appeared on here, and that's where I've sprayed it with water, which I think can be quite interesting. Got a lovely little flash of turquoise in there, which I quite like. I'll probably end up losing it later, but hopefully it'll stay there. Now, something else that I have learned with paintings is you don't always have to finish them. So where I've got this area down here of the paint drips and a few things going on, I really try hard to leave those there. I do end up covering over them quite a lot of the time, but I do quite like having a picture that's kind of not quite finished. I think there's something quite magical about it. It's like showing your workings, isn't it? It's kind of getting those details in there. Now, I'm quite happy that I've got a structure of something here. I'm going to step back for a second so you can see me disappear out of the other shot. I quite like this light bit of cloud, but I don't like that it's too much in the same shape as the mountain. I think I need to bring some more of the dark down a little bit. What are your thoughts? What do you think compositionally? Okay, I'm going to come back in and work into my sky. I am going to now come down to a slightly smaller brush. When I say slightly smaller, this is still like it's a number 18 flat. This is one of the Pebeo brushes. So size-wise against my hand, I'd say that's about 20 mil, something like that. So what I tend to do is I'll wash my brush and then I'll almost dry it completely out before I work with it. So I like a damp brush, but not a wet brush. So I'm going to come up here in my dark bit. That is my ultramarine, my umber, and some of my grey. And I'll keep varying the colour. I don't mix up very much at any one time. I don't want this to be a flat colour. So I'll pick up a bit more ultramarine in some brush strokes and a bit more of the umber in others. Right, let's have that just peeking over there. Okay, so just bringing it right across here. Now I'm just going to take wet fingers and just do a little bit of mixing of some of this. Oops, sorry, jogging you. I quite like the sort of little textures that putting it on slightly thicker that you do tend to do with the palette knife give you. I'm just trying to stop that flapping that's beginning to annoy me. Now, at the moment, these clouds are more dominant. I've got to bring this forward a little bit. But hopefully when I start to work on that and make those more purposeful. I paint a lot of seascapes, and for me, clouds are a bit like that sort of frothy, foamy bit you get on the sea. Now, the contrast that you've got here is actually much stronger on the camera than it is in reality. It's a little bit softer in reality. I'm just gonna... So what I'm trying to do here at the minute is just go over and make sure I've got enough paint. I can always come back and do another layer. Now, when I first started painting, and I want you to be honest, you're a little too much cloud on the left. We'll have a little look in a minute. When I first started painting, I kind of started up in the top corner, and I would paint my way across sort of and make sure this bit was finished, and then I'd make sure this bit was finished, and then I'd make sure this bit was finished. And it took me a long time to kind of be prepared to leave it alone and have it messy and then come back to it and tidy a few things up afterwards. But, you know, it took a while for me to let go of that. Okay, so time to come back in and do a little more on my mountains. Again, I'm going to still use my number 18, coming back with my yellow ochre, my white and my red gold. Does anybody have any questions so far? Just pop on and shout if you do, or pop it up in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on it every now and then. So I'm just looking at where I've got a bit of light just hitting onto the hills here. Picking up a bit more of my red gold. And again, I'm kind of almost using my brush as a printing tool. So I'm dabbing it on. And working like this really doesn't allow you to, you know, be too fussy. And when we're talking about layers, this is quite a thin layer, and that darker blue layer is still showing through underneath, which I quite like. Now I've got this straight line in my cloud. Smudge that away. You like it as a wave? Yeah, it does look like a giant wave. See, I told you I paint seascapes a lot, and I do paint that froth and foam. I'll have to try and de-wave my mountain. But this is the beauty of something like this is, you know, in my head, I was painting a mountain and some clouds, and you can just kind of go, well, actually, it looks more like this, and change it completely. But I'm going to stick with the mountain theme because I'm stubborn. But there's nothing to stop you changing as you go along. Do I deliberately choose some transparent colors? Yes, yeah, sometimes. And sometimes I put it on and then wipe it off, and you only get like a hint of a color left. And that allows you to have something, you know, it sort of transports what's underneath, shows that lower layer. Yeah, it does look like a crashing wave. And that's okay for now. Now I'm going to make this a bit dark because I do want to put a little bit of snow up here. So it's dark against dark, but it'll be a snow-capped little bit eventually. So what I'm doing now is I'm just following the contours of where the shape of that paint went when I put that earlier layer down. So I'm going to play with a little bit here. I'm going to use more of my yellow ochre here. I'm kind of, sort of, I've got my dark sides coming up on the sides there. I want to put in another layer behind this that's in between this colour and this colour, and I want to put a little bit more shadow under there. So I'm coming back into play, mostly with my toning grey. Now, not dark enough. See, I'm so used to painting waves that I'm going to do it out of habit, aren't I? So I'm just going to spray some water onto my cloth. Do I like it better? Do I like it worse? Time will tell. I've got some loose paint here, so I'm just gonna, I just want to bring sort of a shore-ish along here. I want a bit more dark there, and then I'm going to let that dribble. Do a little spray. Now, when you want something to run, you have to spray it quite close. If you spray it too far away, you get a pattern on your picture, but if you want it to actually run, you have to have your nozzle quite close in. I think I need a bit of a palette knife, maybe a bit of my roller. I'm going to use some yellow ochre and some white, and I'm going to put a touch of that magenta in there. So I'm making this mix up here. So clean my brush out. I'm going to bring my roller in. So have I convinced any of you yet to have some fun with something like this? No, I don't like that straight line there. I don't know why it was annoying me, but it was. Now, the other thing that I find is I use old tea towels as a rag, and I can just about squeeze that one out now because I'm using that to control the amount of water on my brush. I'm cleaning my palette knife off. And particularly with something like this, you don't want too much water on it unless you want to spray it and do it deliberately. So, you know, keeping your brush dabbed off on your cloth and wiped off for me is quite important because it controls how much water I've got going on here. I think what I need to do is I just need to bring my lake back into some kind of control. See, again, in my head, I've got a lake here, which is got a river coming off it. And then I'll probably need it to dry for a minute. So I'm coming back in. Now for this one, I'm using this turquoise colour because of the glacial water of the lakes. So I'm using this turquoise and white. I don't want to lose the textures that I've got there, but it's just about making this work within the space that I've got. A bit more of my turquoise. So you've got this odd shape here, so I need to work into that. Now here I'd used the roller and I've got a bit of texture there which is still visible through the paint that I'm layering on. So I've got more layers to come. And I'm not going to tell you where this part of the lake goes. Don't need it to be more controlled. We all think we have to finish everything and we don't. Now by putting those early marks on, you can still hear, when I look close up at it, you can still see the texture from the roller. Like as this dries, that texture will show through other things. I'm going to have some trees and things coming up in the foreground here. I've got some snow to come on here, some trees. Okay, I'm going to come up here and I'm kind of dry brushing, which is more of a watercolor technique, but just on these high peaks. It disappears into that bit of sky, which is fine. And I've got a smaller brush here. This is a number 6. And I'm just kind of scratching around with it a little bit. So I've got little bits of snow there. Now, the other thing I need to do is I need to create some shaded snow. So I've got some blue. So on the shadow side of my peaks, I'm just putting a little bit of blue. just next to that white. I can only just reach this because you probably can't see this, but I've got obviously the camera set up there, so I'm trying to kind of dodge my arm around everything. So having started very loose, this is kind of fairly detailed little bits in there. Do is I'm going to do a bit of newspaper, and I'm literally just tearing little bits of this, and I'm going to add it in. I've been thinking about where they can be up the right way, they can be upside down. Quite like the shape of that one to be upside down, so I'm going to add some of these bits in. Now the way I'm going to adhere them is basically using the acrylic, because acrylic paint is effectively glue and colour. That's what acrylic paint is. So what we can do is we can just put a little bit of acrylic paint on underneath and just glue it down. We've got a little bit underneath, it will hold it in place. So what I want to do is I want to have this so I'm taking a damp brush, I'm taking some of the paint off it. So let me show you. Let's try and hold this so you can see where that, can you see? It's just here. And I want you to be able to see that there's writing there, but not read it. Okay. And it just adds another dimension to it. I put newspaper in paintings a lot, and I get people who are looking at the painting go saying, oh, there's some words in there. And they don't, you can't, it's not really obvious, but it is obvious. So I'm going to put a few more bits in. You can also put patches, you know, this has got some colour on one side. So if you decide you like that, just put that in. But I do quite like having the texture of the words going through. It's very subtle. So it's just taking the piece of newspaper and just deciding where you want it to be. And I have also done this before where I've, you know, you can print things out specifically related. It could be a poem about the place where you're painting, or, you know, there's lots of different things that you can add in with the newspaper. It doesn't just have to be random. I'm just a bit of a random girl. Put some in. Like I say, I tend to put it in and then wipe some of the paint off. And this is why I don't do this at the beginning, because otherwise you just cover over it. So it says, surprise nobody. That's what that bit says. Oh, you just found me on Instagram. Yes, Denise Allen 6405 or Drawn to Water Painter. I've got several Instagram incarnations. I also have Facebook pages. Did any of you follow us as the artist demo days during lockdown? Because I'm part of that as well, which is on Facebook, and we've got a website. But you can also see that with this paint, this was done in the first half. I can come back in and smush it around a bit just by wetting it. Okay, I need to stop fiddling and move on. I want to have on this section here, I want to have some trees. So what I'm going to do is a mix of my blue and brown, just to give me a nice dark. So I'm just mixing this together here, so it's a nice dark colour. I'm just going to have these as at this stage. So they're going to poke up above that edge there. Just sort of break that edge. They're not visible enough, are they? Let's. Let's have some coming up from behind here as well. Now, I'm doing these as like a silhouette shape. So instead of, trying to paint individual trees, this is like silhouettes of an outline of the whole lot. And again, these look darker on the screen than they actually are. Do you know what? Behind these ones, it's nothing to do with what reality would look like. I'm going to put some light trees just to make them all show up. Because I can. So I'm using this round brush and I'm just using the point of it to kind of give me that shape. Okay, how are we doing? Think time again. I quite like that little plateau that's just come on there. I've re-whitened some of my snow. We've got this double layer here. Right down here, I've got where I've put all my newspaper. I want to kind of make these like big slabs of rock. So I'm almost going to outline where I've put my newspaper. Again, I'm just making a dark. So I want to give myself a water's edge.
Do you use other materials other than newspaper?
Yeah, I quite often put maps in as well. They're quite nice. And bits of wool and buttons and beads.
And all of that will just stick to the acrylic?
If it's something more solid than a piece of paper, then I do use a glue. So something like
okay. So buttons you would glue on, obviously.
Yeah, I would use like a PVA or something like that. like adding a whole variety of different things in. So I'm just adding some shadow in here. So although I started out very loose, very abstract, I'm kind of slowly refining it. That's kind of the way in my head what I'm doing is just slowly refining my shapes. Is it looking more like a landscape now? Hopefully.
Yes, it is.
Good. Like I say, and what I'm doing here is I'm using the shapes and the patterns that were created in that paint already, and I'm just exaggerating them. So I'm kind of emphasizing, you know, where the pattern of this texture, you know, happened. See, those bits of newspaper are now fully stuck in. They're perfectly happy there. There's not so very much going on in this corner, and I don't mind that because you don't have to have a lot of information everywhere. Like I say, we're sort of pre-programmed to tidy up and fill in, aren't we? I quite like the fact there's just want enough paint on there, but other than that, I'm not really over worried. Let's have a bit of something just. And just coming back in. It's probably enough over there, I think. Now, very, very small, but there's a little patch there that to me looks like the roof of a house. So I think I'm going to exaggerate that and make that into slightly bigger. Does that help?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Really good. I like that.
Can you see this little smudge in the middle? That's what I'm going to make into my cottage. So we've got okay. Tiny, isn't it, this little cottage? And I think we need to have, sorry, I went very quiet there, didn't I? Concentrating. Now I do have a brighter green, so I'm going to use a little bit of that. It's messy at the minute, but it's this chrome green. We're going to have a little bit of that. I'll bring this up closer when I've done it, because this is kind of getting small detail now, but at least it's easier for you to see this than it would be if I was at the other end of a room. And my house can't be, it's just a little cottage, but if these are trees, then this can't be too much bigger. If there's snow up there, whether the fire would be on, what do we reckon? Am I brave enough to smudge a little bit of smoke? Coming out the chimney. Only visible if you really look, but it's there. I'm quite pleased with all these rocks and the textures. And this pink coming down here, again, it's brighter in reality than it is on the screen, but I quite like that sort of the splash of colour, and it links it to this side as well. So I need to have something over here. I don't like the shape of that bit. Can I bring the camera across a little bit there so we can see? I don't like the shape of that bit. I quite like that bit, but I want to smudge that a bit more. Now, as we're coming closer, we're getting more colour in there. So I've just put a little bit of this brighter green in. So I want to just scrape a little bit of that along as well. And just a little bit along. And just so it's not just there, let's just smudge a bit into there. Now I need something to go on here, but I don't quite know what. I think where my newspaper is, I think that needs to be a bit lighter. So I'm picking up some of the leftover colours that we've got here. Just creating a bit more contrast in my layers. I'm just kind of doing a bit of mark making, a bit like I was down here. Now, I've got a decision to make. This bit to me reminds me of a stand of trees, but I don't want a stand of trees that far off to the edge of the picture. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using the big brush again, but I'm just using the flat side of it to give me some ripples. Again, try not to cover over any of the texture that I had from before. Also going to use some more of the turquoise. It's quite a liberating way of painting this. Still find this shape still a bit visible, so this sort of layering is just adding texture, ripples. Now I've picked up a different blue, which is more of a phthalo, and I've added that in as well. So I'm going to just add a few ripples of that. And that just gives me a bit more dark. Now, with the weather we've got in this particular day, it's not really a reflective view. So I don't want to sort of start mirroring all of my rocks particularly, because I think it would look contrived. Right, so I've put some of that in. I'm just going to smudge it a little bit. On clear days, you get magnificent reflections in some of these waters, but not when the weather's like this. Okay, I need to start thinking about this bit down here. So I think I'm having this as like a little spit of land. So I think I need to put some dark in. So I'm going to make a dark, which is my blue and my brown mixed together again, which is my go-to dark. But because it's on the pink, I'm going to add some of that magenta into it, which gives me this very, very deep purple. It does look very intense, doesn't it? So I've put some of that in, I've cleaned my brush out. I'm doing a bit of smudging. Now I've got that dark in there, I quite like those dark streaks that come through there. Just picking up a bit more of that darker blue. I just want to swizzle into there a bit. So coming back in with my peachy colour, which is the yellow ochre, the magenta and the white. Starting to shape a few things here, and then I'm going to put some foliage. I've got a word I need to paint out there. It says COVID-19, so that's got to go. We don't want any more to do with that, do we? Now, my original intention is to have a tree coming up here. Am I brave enough? What do you reckon? It's really got to be a conifer for this location. Okay. So I'm using my purpley pink that I just had for this shadow colour here. Go on then, let's just do it. I'm going to use a bit of my green black as well. They're there, they're definitely there. So I'm using this flat brush and I'm again just sort of printing with it to give me these shapes. How's that? Is that tree edge enough? Something the second tree. We need a little bit from the third one. Now here I'm using a mixture of my green black and my chrome green. I don't want to cover, there's newspaper under there, so I don't want to cover all of that up, and there's texture there and I don't want to cover all of that up. So that's where my branches will go in relation to not covering other things up. So I'm now going to take some of the chrome green and a little bit of white. I just want to add a little bit of light onto it. Right, I'm now going to come back to my smaller brush and come back in with some brown. Now I've got this picture that I took of some conifers that were after a fire had been through here. And there's an awful lot of these little side branches. So although my trees that I'm painting have got leaves on, I think I need, let's see if I can just move this in slightly. I need to have a few. If I can get it dark enough. A few of these little spiky leaf branches coming off. See, and now this bit I was worried about doesn't matter in the slightest because it's obscured. And we have a lot of Scots pines in the gardens, and they have a lot of these sort of random side branches. Just trying to give a seating so they sit into the landscape here a little bit. And just a little more light. Just trying to make sure sort of sometimes one tree goes in front of or behind another. So let me see if I can bring that in a little closer so you can see it. Try and get the light on it. So that's what we've got with those trees. They look really black in the image, but they're not. I may come back and do a little more on this in a minute, but I want to come over and do some stuff over here. So what I want to do here is like some grasses coming up and a few other things in here as well. So I am going to start coming back to these colours. So I've got this ochre, my magenta. I'm going to add some toning grey into it for a minute. Making sure I don't lose that newspaper. And I need a darker version of this. So I'm going to use my magenta and some ultramarine.
Denise, we've got about a quarter of an hour left. Is that okay
That's
with you?
fabulous.
Okay.
So I'm creating this sort of darker layer. With acrylics, you tend to put light onto dark. So if you're building something up, you tend to put your dark layers in. I'm going to start scratching. Again, using my water just to push some of this paint around. And this is more of a sort of watercolor technique, really, this sort of using a wet brush to move paint around. But nobody told me I couldn't, so I did. Again, just making sure that I don't cover over too much on that newspaper. And I'm using the bottom end of the brush just to scratch. Okay, I just want to break that edge up there. So again, just softening that back end. I'm not going to paint all the way down here. I'm going to leave it. Even just doing that dabbing with the tissue creates some really interesting textures. And this is kind of dictating to me where and how my grasses and everything else is going, where it's going to be. Let me just bring that in, see if we can see some of that texture. So can you see how that patterning is all happening with the textures on with the tissue and the scratching? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the dark colour. So again, I'm mixing up this mix, which is blue, magenta, and some brown. I want this sort of dark purpley colour, and I want it to be reasonably thick. Because what I'm going to do is take my roller and I want to roll the edge. So can you see I'm getting it actually just onto one side? And then with that, I can roll some little grasses. I'm going to do some lighter ones over the top. So now I've got some more of my roller. That's my corner, right. Now I need to just give my roller a clean. Before I do the light, I'm just going to come in with my brush, clean it a little. Just trying to get rid of some of the marks I don't like, move things around a little bit. It's a bit solid there, so just break that one up. Now up here, I want to just draw a few little bits in. The other thing you can do with the dark is you can actually make sort of seed heads and flower shadows. Again, I'm just sort of printing with the end of the brush. And then I'm going to use my finger and just break up some of those shapes. Smush it a little bit. Right, so I'm going to do exactly the same, but with a light colour to go over the top here. So I'm going to come back into my yellow ochre and magenta mix. So I'm mixing that up there. And then I need to add some white into that to lighten it. Again, quite a lot of it because I need to pick it up on the roller. So I'm just going to pick it up on the edge of the roller on that corner. And just lay that through. I hope if you do nothing else, you will do grasses with a roller. Clean my roller down again. Come back with my brush and just do a bit of smushing around. And the texture you get with doing it like this is something that it's just about impossible to do with a brush. Now what this makes me feel is I need to do a little something over here. So let's come in with the dark that I'd already used. It's gone too green. Now I'm doing this with a brush because it's that much smaller, but I may well just do a couple of little roller bits as well. Not sure I've got enough paint on the roller. Nope. Just picking up a little more paint. I've just got to be careful that I don't make them too big because then they'll come closer foreground than over here. What was the type of acrylic and are the brushes synthetic? Yes, my brushes that I use are synthetic. I use these ones. This is a Da Vinci brush that I use. I've had these years. They just go on and on and on. The other ones that I've been using have mostly been Pebeo ones because I quite like them. I work quite a lot with Pebeo. And I quite like their brushes. All I'm trying to do is, this is quite rough ground, so I just want to make this sort of match it a little bit, so make it a little bit rougher ground. Come in with my light colour. We've roughened up that ground. I quite like the way this has gone in here. I don't think I want to do much more to this at the minute.